Helsing and the Count. Tom was required by the state to wear a respirator, but he wasn't feeling it that morning. He was fully clothed with his hair tied back and his gloves pulled tight over his hands. Yet he didn't want to cover his face. Everything was so damn sterile about his job. That was the only part that absolutely drove him crazy. It was about time to get a little dirty, and besides, it wasn't every day he got to work on a familiar body twice in the same month. His assistant had wheeled the deceased into the room from the refrigerator, and had already placed the body on a stainless steel table. Tom wheeled his tray of instruments closer, and when he took a seat on his stool, he put his face inches from the dead man's nose and blew air over his sunken face. "Remember me?" Tom said. He placed his fingertips over the dry wound in the man's neck, just at the carotid artery. Then he traced his hand down the man's cold arm. Tom grasped the wrist and squeezed. The blood had already been drained, leaving less work for Tom in the embalming room. "If I'd known I'd be seeing you again, I would have embalmed you right then and there," he whispered into the dead man's ear. The last place he probed with his finger was the 1-inch gash in the man's upper thigh, just above the groin. Now the skin was so cold, so leathery. It was lucky that the body had been found early in the morning and not in the afternoon, or there might have been a spoiled banana on his work table. A serial killer, Tom thought to himself. It was the work of a serial killer. The police had never seen anything like it before. There had been steel knitting needles protruding from the body in select places, but not in random places. They had been stuck carefully into the arteries, to drain the man of his blood. An autopsy had been performed, and the cause of death was most certainly from the puncture in the man's neck. Then, as the man had been dead or dying, the rest of the ritual had been performed. A ritual! Tom thought hungrily. He couldn't rightly believe the amount of doom and gloom that was prophesied in the morning headlines. There was a serial killer in Austin, and it was only a matter of time before more turned up dead. In the obituary, it proclaimed that the body of Randolph Morris would be taken to the Green Mortal Funeral Home by that afternoon. Tom had choked on his oatmeal there at his kitchen table. The man he had left naked and blue inside a dumpster would be transported to his workplace, to be entrusted into his hands. The sheer irony was terrifying, but somehow calming. It was all horribly personal for him. It was better that he finished what he began. It was better that he buried the poor son of a bitch. He couldn't ignore the hand he had been dealt. The first human being he had ever murdered was now being forced back into his life. It was as if by taking everything away from the man, he was now forever responsible for him. Randolph Morris, his new orphan pet. That was another thing. The name in the paper. He hated to know that he had killed Randolph Morris instead of some haphazard man he had nabbed from a parking lot. The spontaneity had been so exuberating for Tom, and it was worth looking forward to in the near future. He didn't know when the next urge would strike him, and that was half the fun. But the name ruined everything. It was a lot harder to look at the man inside his embalming room while he still had fresh memories in his head. Memories from the night he had stabbed him in the throat. As Tom got to work, another memory flashed before his eyes. He was 8 years old and his father was taking him by the hand. There were a set of heavy doors that opened on them to reveal a dreary entranceway with mahogany tables and candles and pitchers of flowers. The musty smell hit him first, almost like the smell in a hospital, but a little different. The flowers were there to cover up the heavy musk of death, but Tom could see through it, and he liked that he was able to distance the two. There was a viewing going on, and a man in a suit with clasped hands nodded at him. The coffin had been so shiny and new, Tom could see his face in its glossy coating. He remembered that he was much too short to see over, so his father had to pick him up. Tom shook away the memory, and his head responded with an excruciating ripple of pain. He dug his gloved palms into his forehead, where germicide trickled down his cheeks and spotted his plastic coveralls. When the feeling subsided, he gripped the operating table helplessly, glaring down at his victim with swimming eyes. "Why'd you have to come here?" he spat. He hung his head, crying nauseous orange fluid into the drain between his feet. Tom sighed and pulled the tray closer. First he washed the body from head to toe with a sponge soaked in germicide. Then he went about gluing the eyelids and mouth shut. After that he packed cotton into the man's nostrils to reduce that sunken skull-like look. He got up from his stool and retrieved the embalming machine from the other end of the room. With a scalpel, he carefully made an incision in the man's neck and inserted the end of the tube. He switched on the machine and watched the sickly colored embalming fluid inch its way up the hollow plastic. He sat back and watched, and every once in a while massaged a few places on the body where the fluid was collecting. He watched as the dyes inside the bloodstream gradually altered the pale flesh into a bright new hue to temporarily mask the calamity of death and its sheer ugliness. The man came back to life for a moment, only a moment, before Tom threw a tarp over him. Once his shift was over, Tom stripped off his plastic uniform and fluffed up his collar before the mirror. He ducked out of the cold embalming room and resurfaced inside the parlor, where one of the directors was speaking quietly with a woman between a stocky man's arms. Tom knew who these people were, Mr. and Mrs. Morris. Tom wondered if they had read the paper that morning. Of course they had. The woman caught Tom's eyes and they locked. He froze before the front door, his hand just turning the knob. For that split second, her face relaxed and her chin dropped to her chest. Without her even knowing it, she had stared into the eyes of her son's killer and had found the strength to look away. Tom tried to give her a small professional smile, a sympathetic gesture, not showing any teeth or gums, just a slight lift of the lips, but she had already planted her face back into her husband's chest. Hands slowly caressed her unwashed hair. Tom opened the door. "Can you believe what they're calling him?" asked the father as he petted his wife's head. "The pin and needle killer. How sick is that?" Yeah, Tom thought as he stepped out into the sunlight. So fucking sick. His job was starting to get to him. He couldn't possibly keep it as long as he was living a double life as the pin and needle killer. The lawyer was bad enough, but once the old man came into the home, he almost screamed in terror. Everything was coming back to crush him into the ground. He remembered that he had gone into the bathroom after fixing up the woman, and cried until his head hurt and his stomach lifted. He vomited into the toilet and lay there on the ground, watching through the gap under the door to make sure he was alone, and then he had cried some more. He couldn't possibly be an embalmer for the victims he had murdered the week before. It was too much for him to handle. He was starting to experience the itch again, gnawing at the back of his head and scrambling his vision. The day before, he had watched a young kid walking home from school and had almost pursued him. He had been too afraid of seeing the boy again on that cold steel slab. It was more than just a nightmarish case of deja vu. It was like working on the same project twice. Even when he knew it was perfect the first time around, he liked to remember the woman as he had last seen her, with the biblical message spelled out across her chest with thumbtacks. To see her second time with her wounds scrubbed clean made him sick. Before, she had been a work of art, but in the mortuary, she was just a dead woman, and he had killed her. Tom was going to quit. He was driving himself crazy there inside the funeral home, forever haunted by life-size ghosts from his past. Both of his jobs were overlapping, and that could not happen. Now he had to pick one or the other. Once he was forced to choose, he realized it wasn't much of a competition. His job as an embalmer had never felt like a career anyway. Even after the several years he had spent in school, it was more like a hobby, so that he wouldn't have to think so much about the outside. But now that he was experimenting on his own living and breathing subjects, he didn't need to dress up dead bodies for immediate families. No. What he had on the outside was much more satisfying. He figured that he could still take what he had learned in school and put it to good use. In truth, there really wasn't much of a difference between Tom and the pin and needle killer. They both dealt in death. But Tom was a lot more formal with his work. The killer only wanted to create art. On July 13th, he decided to put in his 2 weeks' notice and think about taking a job elsewhere. In all honesty, he was tired of the city. There wasn't another funeral home he wanted to apply for, not while he was busy leaving bodies for the trash men to discover. He could never go back to professionally mixing and injecting chemicals. A part of him felt dislodged. He had always identified himself with his job, but now that he was moving on, all he had left was that sinister title slapped across every newspaper in the country. PNK for short, Tom thought to himself. It would be fine. Over the years, he had gradually smuggled fluids and instruments from his work home with him. Without them, he wouldn't have been able to drain his victims with such precision. He supposed he could start embalming the bodies now, to save some poor guy the hassle. He knew he would have appreciated it. He could see himself working out of his own basement. But would he stay in Austin, and over time let the police hone in on him? When he thought of going back home to Colorado, something inside him stirred. He would have to be patient. There was his house to consider, and the money he would surely need to travel. He supposed he had enough in savings. He didn't spend much, and he would only have to buy an apartment at first. Then he would have to find something more suitable for his needs, something with a lot more wiggle room. Excitement flowered inside his chest, churning his stomach. He couldn't wait. That day he put in a call at Mackenzie Realty. Helsing. Harvey Miller got his first call of the morning around 6 a.m. He was just hanging up his coat inside the closet when the phone screamed. He didn't answer it right away. He sat down in his swivel chair and tapped on his desk. Then he put the receiver to his ear, said hello, and gave his name. "Hello, this is Sheriff Harvey Miller," a man's voice asked. "This is him? Harvey Miller from Lakeshore, Colorado?" "Yes, can I help you?" "I'm calling about the story in the paper." Harvey popped a toothpick into his mouth and softened it with his tongue. He looked over at the front door, where the front page of yesterday's paper was hanging crooked from 2 thumbtacks. "What story would that be?" he asked. "The pin and needle killer. I read that a body was found with similar lacerations as the bodies in Austin." "Well, you can read." "Yes, fine. I'm calling from Texas." I think this story has gone national. Not that I'm surprised, the man said. How'd you get this number? Look, I won't take any more of your time. I don't know, the coincidence is too much for me to ignore. Well, by all means, spit it out. My name is Larry Spaulding, and I manage the Green Mortal Funeral Home here in Austin. I noticed in the papers that the woman was discovered with her body embalmed. Is that correct? Yes, the blood was drained as usual, but the killer went a step further this time. I recently employed a man down here for 2 years. He was fresh out of college and he showed all the qualifications. I employed him as an embalmer. Anyway, a few months ago he quit, which was shocking. As far as I knew, he loved his job. But he told me he was moving and he would be selling his house. Miller straightened in his seat. Did he tell you where he was moving? To Colorado. He told me he was going back home to Colorado. Jesus. What's his name, Mr. Spaulding? Thomas Griffith. So you think it could be him? It's a lead. Before today, we had nothing to go off. No prints or semen or saliva. No one has spotted his car or his person. He's as careful and quiet as a mouse. On the other hand, maybe he's not that careful. Dear God, Sheriff, he worked on their bodies, Spaulding blurted. What's that? Miller was waving others into his office. My funeral home took in the last 2 victims, and he was the one that embalmed them. Miller was scrolling notes into an open notebook, and he handed it over to the nearest police officer. Can I get your home phone number and address, Mr. Spaulding? We will keep in touch. The kid was forced into the office, and a set of strong hands pushed him into a chair. Teller came up from behind him and tapped his shoulder. The kid looked around frantically, and at once began to rehearse his side of the story. Teller ignored every word, and instead turned on his radio. Loud rock and roll flooded the office, forcing the kid to speak louder. Teller only adjusted the volume. I'm telling you, man, I didn't have anything to do with that murder in the mountains. I have an alibi. I was living with this chick in Fort Collins, the kid shouted, rocking in his chair. He bitterly yanked at the handcuffs around his wrists. Teller turned the radio down. We're waiting on some people, okay, son? Then we'll hear everything you have to say. I can explain the car if that's what this is all about. Yeah, that's what this is all about. Teller took a seat on the other end of the desk. I can explain everything. Sorry I'm late, Ralph. Harvey Miller entered the office at a slow jog and came to a stop once he spotted the man in handcuffs. This is him, then? Harvey asked. Henry Miller entered his office at a wide stride and came to a stop once he spotted the man in handcuffs. This is him, then? Harvey asked. Teller offered him a chair, but he passed it up. He stood directly in front of the man and tapped his foot. Where'd you find him? He was pumping gas a few miles down the road. A cruiser ran his license plate, and it matches with the Griffith fellow, Teller explained. Obviously, his appearance doesn't match. Miller took a seat on the desktop and adjusted his pants. In the process, he made sure to touch the holster hooked to the belt, and the kid seemed to notice. What's his name? Asked Miller. You can ask me, asshole. I'm right here, the kid spat. I'll talk to you when I'm damn ready. The kid hung his head and his hands went limp. His name is Tobias Stevens. He grew up in Texas, but now seems to be living in that car, Teller answered. The car right outside? That's Griffith's Jeep? That's the one. Miller turned on the kid. Now, how did you come to possess this vehicle? I found it. You found it? What, with the keys in the ignition? That's right, Tobias smiled. See, you get it. He's a fucking rambler, Miller advised Teller. Yeah, he does talk a lot. No, I mean he's a hitchhiker. Griffith must have picked him up somewhere near the city. And what did you do, Tobias? How'd you convince him to give you his car? I have a way with words, Tobias replied. He told me he wanted to ditch his car. He was on the run or something. I said I'd take it, and I dropped him off at a gas station. You didn't happen to drop him off at exit ramp? Miller broke off to free a piece of paper from his hip pocket. Exit ramp E217? You didn't happen to leave him at the side of the road, did you? No, a gas station, like I said. A girl was found near exit ramp E217 with her brains bashed in. She was lying in 2 feet of water, with her body bloated like a balloon. Tobias' face went sour. Why are you telling me this shit? Because, Tobias, you stole Mr. Griffith's car at this supposed gas station, and because he was desperate for transportation, he flagged this woman down and killed her. Because of you, she's dead. Tobias shook his head. No, man, you can't blame me for this. Blame that sick fuck. I didn't have anything to do with it. Miller pocketed the piece of paper. What was in the car, Ralph? Just this. Teller passed Miller a battered copy of Dracula. Everything else belongs to the kid. Was that Griffith's? Miller asked Tobias. Yeah, that's his. What else was in the car? Well, beside the kid's clothes, Miller motioned for Teller to stop. I was talking to Mr. Stevens. What else was in the car that specifically belonged to Griffith? He had some suitcases full of clothes. I got rid of that stuff. So all you kept of his was this book? Why? I like the cover. Okay, you're coming with me, kid, Miller told him. The car can stay here. I'll put him in the back of my cruiser. Do I have to fill out any paperwork for Stevens here? Nah, Jefferson and Lakeshore are in the same jurisdiction, Teller said. You're free to take him. I just feel bad that you had to come all the way down here. Don't worry about it, Ralph. Miller grabbed Tobias by the arm and hauled him to his feet. What are you going to do with me? The kid asked. You're going to identify Griffith if you can. So, Harvey, you want to tell me what you found inside the guy's home? Teller inquired. You didn't hear it on the news? Nope, the cable guy's coming next week. We found the victim's blood and some instruments. He had his own private mortuary set up. He also had a name tag for the dog-eared bookstore underneath his couch. He had been working there for 2 months, and the manager told us that he simply hadn't shown up for work on Monday. We also have a description for a Ford pickup. White. I'm sure the license plate has already been faxed to your station. We did get that. Thank you, Harvey. Teller stood up and they shook hands. Thank you, Ralph. He ushered Tobias out the door. How do you know this guy's still in your town? Teller asked. I don't, Miller called back.